Hello and welcome to Leaders Up Close. It's our seminar series run by the Engineering Leadership and Innovation Institute here at UCF. I'm Tim Kottner and I'm the director. I get the honor, the privilege to orchestrate some of this. Today's a great seminar series. Great speaker is Mr. Todd Stansbury, who is the Vice President and Athletic Director here at UCF. I want to thank Robin and Annie for making this partnership possible and for bringing you here and sharing your story. He's going to share a story about endless opportunities. And if you think about what we're about here in the Institute, it's about world-changing solutions and maybe grabbing those endless opportunities when we see them. So please help me welcome Mr. Todd Stansbury.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity because this is one of the things that actually makes my job fun, and that is meeting with students and who, like y'all, how many engineering students do we have in here? I know there's some others, and I might as well get it out there right out of the bat. The reason I leapt at this opportunity is because, in my opinion, the engineering degree, regardless of what you're going to do with your life, leaves all the doors open. And it is one of those degrees that will test you to the max, and regardless of what field you decide to ultimately pursue, people are going to know what you're made of. And there's a lot in common with, I like to say, all things equal, you pick a student athlete every time because you know what they're made of. And so I thought what I'd do is just start with, we came up with the title Endless Possibilities because my story and kind of how I got here is, it's pretty remarkable when I think about where I started. And I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, just outside of Toronto, literally on Lake Ontario. My house was across the street from the lake. And neither of my parents graduated from high school, and I'm the oldest in my family. So a lot of times we talk about first-generation college students. I was a first-generation high school student. And so college and going to college and all the things that go with it was not a main topic of conversation around my kitchen table growing up. My dad was a cop, and so I knew all about what was going on in the town that I grew up in. But anyways, my story, I really think, starts when I'm 10 years old. And like most Canadians that have the opportunity, we were in Florida in February, March, as long as we could be here to escape the snow. And we were fortunate. My mom, she would actually come down from January, February, March, so she got a great deal. And then those of us that were in school would come when we could. And those that weren't in school, my younger brother and sister, were able to come with her for those 3 months. And it was on one of those trips that we happened to be staying at the same place as the Georgia Tech football team, or a number of members that were there for, must have been either their reading week or spring break. I can't quite figure out, when I think back on it, how they were able to take a week off and go to Daytona Beach for a week, but they did. And then in there, I decided that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a football player at Georgia Tech, because these guys were bigger than life. They were running the place and having obviously a great time, and they became my role models. They became, at age 10, that is what I decided I wanted to do. It didn't matter that I was in Canada. I not only had never played the game, but wouldn't have an opportunity to play it till I got to high school, because there was no Little League or any of that kind of Pop Warner or anything like that. I was a hockey player, like everybody in Canada, right? You're a hockey player. So, but that's what I had decided I was going to do, and and I didn't. So when I got actually, I was playing hockey at the highest level. So age group all throughout, I played against Wayne Gretzky. So I was playing in a league that was the highest level. But when I got to high school, instead of trying to go into the OHL, which is a minor league system, I quit hockey and started playing football. My big problem was I was 5'2", 127 pounds. And they gave me number 65 and put me at cornerback, which that number made me an actual illegal player. And so not only was I not going to start, I wasn't getting anywhere close to the field. And I basically held a blocking dummy for a year and just got pummeled by the bigger kids on the team. Things, though, worked out. I grew, got bigger, I got faster, all the things kind of started to fall into place. And my junior year, I was offered a football scholarship to go to Georgia Tech among other schools. And I know being engineers, for the most part, you chose your discipline and your school and all that for all the right reasons. I chose mine because I met a bunch of wild and crazy guys when I was 10 years old and decided that's what I wanted to do. It had nothing to do with what a great school it is, what kind of education I would get, where it was located at. It had nothing to do with that. So I thank God every day that those guys were from a place like Georgia Tech when they could have been from anywhere, and that's what I would have decided I wanted to do. So I went to Georgia Tech, and I consider myself the accidental college graduate because I went there for all the wrong reasons. I went there because of these wild and crazy guys. I went there because I wanted to play football on TV. I went there because I wanted to basically play, and that has really guided me through my career in intercollegiate athletics, that these young people that I am fortunate enough to work with will do anything I want them to do just because they want to play a game. So I got a carrot and a stick, and it's my responsibility to use it. That these kids, because they want to dribble a basketball or play football or run track or whatever, will do whatever we ask them to do. And it also, as I've gone through my career and really reflected on kind of how it's transpired, you know, you don't know what kind of influence you're going to make on the people around you. You all have spheres of influence. You all have younger brothers and sisters and nephews and neighbors. And in my case, the thing that turned the light on for me, the light bulb, or was that defining moment that was a fork in the road for me, was the Hawaiian Inn in Daytona Beach. So just think of the power that you have based on where you are now. And I think that's one of the things that we don't realize when we're young or even as we get older, that we do have a lot of influence. And a lot of times we're not going to know what decisions we make, the effect, the ripple effect it can have, and the light bulb that gets turned on because of it. The interesting thing is that guy that I met when I was 10, his name was Scott Zalke, or his name is Scott Zalke, played quarterback at Georgia Tech. My sophomore year, he went on from Georgia Tech and actually became an attorney. And my sophomore year, he was hired by the athletic department to run the academic support program for the student athletes. Because he was a good student, he played football, they brought him in. And so he was kind of legal counsel / academic advisor. So this kid that I had met when he was 19 or 20 and I was 10 now becomes my academic advisor. I mean, how wild is that? I mean, it's crazy. So, which to me was the greatest thing that could ever happen, because this is a person that I had idolized for almost my whole life. And so I finished my career at Georgia Tech, I graduate, and I start my career in banking with Citizens and Southern National Bank. And I really think I'm going to be a Wall Street banker. That's kind of what I want to do. And I had no idea what that even meant. And so here's the other thing that I've learned along the way. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you have a clue. And I was one of those. I was a good student. People considered me to be smart. I was at a really smart school, surrounded by smart people. I was clueless when it came to what it meant to be a banker, because guess what? That's not something we talked about around my kitchen table. So that's the other thing I've learned is we aspire to be what we know. And so if your dad's an engineer, doctor, lawyer, accountant, professional, you kind of got a leg up. You kind of know at least how the game is played, or at least you got a coach that can kind of coach you along the way. If you're a first-generation college kid, and that's not your background, then you need help, whether you know it or not. And unfortunately, if you're first generation like I am, you don't even know you need help, because I did everything I was asked to do. I got good grades, I went to class, I did all the things I was supposed to do, I played football, and I thought, guess what? Hey, I've graduated from Georgia Tech, great GPA, played football, had a great career. I wish it was better, but obviously I played outside linebacker, and you can tell I'm not exactly the biggest guy around. So I went to work for C&S Bank, and I got that opportunity through my head coach, Bill Curry, makes a call to some VP. They call me in, I get an interview, smart guy, I interview well, I get the job. I was technically sound. I could break down a financial statement, I could do whatever I needed to do as far as being a banker. 2 weeks into the job, I get a call from, or I get called into my manager's office, and he says, Todd, you're doing a great job, but we need you to do 3 things. We need you to cut your hair, buy some white shirts, and change your shoes. I didn't know how the game was played. I didn't know about if you're working for a very conservative southern bank in Atlanta, Georgia, you couldn't wear a mullet. I didn't realize that I was wearing those saddle shoes. I didn't even know what wingtips were, let alone I was supposed to be wearing them. And so that's the other thing that really has resonated with me throughout my career, especially in working in athletics, where it doesn't matter who your dad is. It doesn't even matter if you have a dad. It all matters. I got into Georgia Tech while I was a decent student. It was my 40 time that got me in there, not my SAT score. But I realized that depending on where you come from dictates what you know, and dictates whether you know how this game is played or not. In my case, I had no clue. I learned pretty quick, though. Cut my hair to, say, maybe a quarter mullet. I didn't quite give it up totally. And bought some white shirts, which I still wear today. Not the same shirt, of course, but I still show up every day for work in a white shirt, because you know what? I'm colorblind in a lot of ways, and it's easy to match up a white shirt with any kind of tie you want to wear. So I still wear the white shirt, and while I no longer wear wingtips, I got it down. I got it figured out. And I really credit, how many managers, I was fortunate. He called me in and told me what I was doing wrong. there's probably a lot of people that just let you go right off the cliff. And I was very fortunate that that didn't happen to me. 2 years into my banking career, and I was on the fast track after I got the right shoes, right shirt, right haircut. Sounds like a Kenny Chesney song. And Scott Zulke, who is the assistant AD for academic support at Georgia Tech, calls me and says, "Todd, you want my job? I'm going to LA to pursue my legal career full-time." He's an entertainment lawyer. And I just wanted to know whether you would be interested. You kidding me? I'd never thought about athletics as a career before, but all of a sudden this guy that I met when I was 10 on a beach in Florida, I not only end up at Georgia Tech because of him, now I'm totally shifting gears and changing my career because it actually sounded a lot more fun than what I was doing. So, two points I'd like to make. One is the incredible power of your network. You never know where your opportunities are going to come from or who's going to provide them for you. I mean, you think of now, and you're at a world-class institution, you got world-class faculty, you've got an incredible opportunity to meet people that are going to open up a lot of doors and provide a lot of influence for you for your entire careers. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward. In my case, my defining moment and my mentor and the person that opened the doors for me was a 20-year-old kid that played football on the Georgia Tech football team. And I can trace my whole career to that moment when I met this guy and I was 10 years old. So that's the other part of it. You don't know who's related to who. Maybe the person that's cleaning your dormitory room. It may be the person that you meet through your various clubs, your organizations. It's going to be the people that you're sitting beside right now. Because a lot of times we focus so much on who's in the front of the room, we lose sight of who's sitting beside us in the room. And I just look at my own career and where my teammates are now and what they're doing and how fortunate I was to be at a place like that, rubbing elbows with people at the time that weren't exactly geniuses. I mean, some of these guys were total goofballs, and now they're presidents of corporations. And that's going to happen here too. So there's two lessons there. One, make sure you network with, and it needs to be, and it's not a collection of Facebook friends or LinkedIn connections. It's really knowing people. It's really knowing them, and it's not who can collect the most business cards. And it also doesn't matter what the title on that business card is or whether they even have a business card. Because at the end of the day, the network is about having really good relationships with people, being trustworthy, having good judgment, and so that someday down the road, you may not even know this, but somebody may say, "Hey, didn't you go to UCF? Weren't you in engineering in 2013? I'm interviewing, or I'm talking to, or I'm looking at so-and-so." And if that is a close friend, confidant, somebody that they trust, and it comes back positive, even though they may not have seen you in 10, 15, 20 years, but they know you, they know what you were made of when you were a student, that'll go so much farther than a bunch of recommendation letters from people that barely know you. Happens in athletics. Athletics is a very small community, and it happens all the time. An example of that is, okay, I've got 500 student athletes a year. So do I know them all? No. Would I love to know them all? Unfortunately, the higher you get, it's harder to do. When I was the academic advisor to the football team, I knew them all. AD, I don't know them all. But so I get an email yesterday from Shaw Industries. VP down there, one of my teammates, looking for 2 candidates in their corporate sales division. Trust me, if I send him 2 candidates, he's hired every person I've ever sent him. And in a couple of those instances, HR at Shaw Industries, which is a Berkshire Hathaway company, bounced those candidates because they didn't fit the criteria, they didn't fit what they were looking for. And my buddy went back and said, no, we need to take a look at this person again. Well, one, they ended up they've hired everybody I've ever sent them, or at least offered them a job, because sometimes, obviously, I send them the best people I got, because I know if I do that, they will interview, and I can't guarantee they'll hire, but in this case right now I'm batting 1,000. But those are also the same people I'm sending everywhere else that calls me and says, hey, I'm looking for an all-star. In fact, we're creating a program right now in our Leadership Institute called the First Round Draft Choice Program, and it's to have our Leadership Institute working in conjunction with the business community, and the value proposition to the business community is, if you've got a 2-hour interview and a lunch with a candidate and you're trying to figure out whether they're a good fit or not for your company, what happens if you were with our kids for their 4 years of being in college? Then you would know who your first round draft choices are, and you'll know they're good fit. So that's what we're working with and working on in our program. But the 2 kids, because they're in Arizona, so the 2 candidates I've sent him are at Oregon State, where I just came from. Better fit, it'll work better. I worry about somebody moving from Florida to Phoenix, not knowing what they're getting into. But I've got these all-star kids at a place I used to be at that I've recommended for those jobs. They don't even know it. They don't even know they've been recommended for a job. And I've actually done that with student athletes that have no idea that they've been recommended or I've put their name in, and that happens all the time. And so that's why treating people with respect and always being on your A game, and I mean being honest, having good judgment, because you know what? 20 years from now, people that you went to class with or friends with right now are going to have the same perception of you 20 years from now that they have right now. So I have teammates that I will go to battle with, but I can't hire. And they may have, I mean, that was 20 years ago. I mean, actually it's longer than that, which is kind of scary. But my perception of them is what they were as 22-year-old kids when we were idiots together. And so you don't think about that when you're doing stupid stuff at 18, 19, 20, but if you're doing stupid stuff with a 20-year-old that's going to end up being CEO of Google, and you got a chance for a high-level position, they're going to remember you from the day, especially if you haven't been in contact with them. And so it is so important that, one, you develop strong relationships and you don't have to worry about the titles that the people have. In a lot of cases, it's going to be your classmates. Who knows who in here is going to, I mean, right in this room here, with these numbers, with the intellect that you have already shown, I mean, it's a race to the top. and you have no idea who's going to get there first. And so I've been fortunate. I guess I wasn't too much of a bozo in college because I've had a lot of help along the way. And that's the other thing. You can't get there by yourself. You've got to have help along the way. And so don't try to do it by yourself. So I went to Georgia Tech as an academic advisor to the football team. See, here's the thing, you can do anything. I'd never dreamed of doing that before, but they said, hey, good student, played football, you'll figure it out, right? I did it different than a counselor. I did it different than your typical, what I did, which is how you would do it. I took the statistics of when we were losing kids, and I found out if we kept them from the end of their freshman year and we could keep them in for another semester in their sophomore year, we had a great chance of them graduating, and I did it completely by the numbers. So I did it completely by the numbers. I knew where the pinch points were, and then I tried to figure out, and then I backed out from there, okay, why is it that this is a pinch point? Why is it that this is when we're losing kids? And then I put the programming around it, and I surrounded that group or that year or that semester or whatever it may be, whatever the numbers told me, and that's how I designed a program that ultimately became known as the NCAA Champs Life Skills Program, which was the program we built at Georgia Tech that now every school in the country is using. And it took the analytics to be able to do that, and then input the counseling and the touchy-feely stuff that you got to have. But you got to know what the problem is first, and that's what you are going to be so equipped to do, whether you decide to be a teacher, a counselor, a rocket scientist, whatever it is that you want to do. That's why what you're doing now is going to be, that's why I say the endless possibilities. You've done all the right things up till now. So it's totally up to you. So I was at Georgia Tech for about 10 years as the assistant athletic director for academic support. Incredible experience. But growing up on Lake Ontario, I used to sit on the banks of the lake as a little boy and look across the lake, and my dream was to travel. I wanted to see the world. I thought I was actually looking at the United States. I didn't realize it was Niagara-on-the-Lake about 20 miles away. But, so I'd been dating a woman for about 3 years, and we were 35 years old, and she wanted to know where this thing was going. And I said, no, I can't get married yet because I need to travel around the world. And so this would have been in like October, and she said, well, I'll tell you what. If we get married, I'll go with you, but I'm not going as your girlfriend. I said, deal. October, we were married by February. By March, I had a house. I sold my house. We sold everything we had. She sold her stuff. We got 2 backpacks, a one-way ticket to London, England, and spent 18 months traveling around the world as backpackers. Now, we weren't 22-year-old kids. I was an assistant AD at Georgia Tech. People thought we were nuts. I'd never get back in the business. I'm on the fast track, this and that. You're crazy. My wife's parents, obviously, she married an assistant AD, and a month later she was homeless. I don't know that they were too fired up about it. Most incredible experience of our lives. I mean, unbelievable. So we got a one-way ticket to London. We traveled through Europe, the Middle East, East Africa, India, Nepal, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, came home. Another one of those just, I feel like I've had a number of defining moments in my life. One is meeting Scott Zolke in Daytona Beach. The second one is going to college and a whole new world opening up to me. And then third was backpacking around the world. The interesting thing is, when I got back, there were 3 jobs open in athletics across the country. And I applied for all 3. It was University of Houston, Michigan State, and East Carolina. I got interviews with all 3. And the first question in every interview was, tell me about this trip. So the moral of that story is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. If you've got a goal, if there is something that you want to do, go for it. Because what ended up happening to me is, I took a year and a half, went around the world, came back, got a job at the University of Houston as an associate athletic director, which is a higher level than the one I left at Georgia Tech. So I left for a year and a half and came back and got a promotion and a raise. And 3.5 years later, I was an athletic director at East Tennessee State. That would have never happened had I stayed at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is a destination place for athletic administrators. Somebody's got to die, retire, or whatever before you can't move up. And the other part about it, mentally, in my mind, I would have never thought about leaving that place. It was my home. That's where I grew up. I loved that place. Since I was 10 years old, I wanted to go there. Why would I ever leave Georgia Tech? I wouldn't. Till I jumped in a cold swimming pool, which is resigned from my job, traveled around the world, came back, and had to start over. But I had a heck of a jump start. So here's the other part of it. Opportunity will present itself. You just have to be prepared to walk through that door when it opens, and you're not going to know when and where. You got to just do all the right things. This was blind faith on my part. I mean, is it scary resigning from your job and traveling around the world and spending all your money and coming back cold? It's scary. But I knew I had a great network. I knew I had done a great job. I knew that when I came back, people would take my phone call. I knew that I had done all the right things. Now, I didn't know where that would lead. I didn't know whether it would get me back in athletics, the athletics industry. I didn't know any of that. I just had this faith that I'd done all the right things. I was incredibly connected because I worked for great people. My AD was Dr. Homer Rice, who's really, I think, credited with professionalizing athletics administration in this country. My coach was Bill Curry, which he's an icon for integrity and doing it the right way and all those types of things. So I felt, and I went to Georgia Tech. So I felt I had done all the right things. I didn't know where it would lead. I just felt, know what, it'll be okay. An opportunity will present itself, and guess what? It did. And so I could have worked those 3.5, 4, 5 years and never been an AD before I was 40. Here I took a year and a half off, and I was an AD by 40, which was a goal. But leaving Georgia Tech opened up a whole world. Just like going to Georgia Tech opened up a whole new world, leaving it opened up a whole new world. So don't be afraid. Also, do something you're passionate about. Don't worry about the money. When I went from banking to athletics, I took an incredible pay cut. You know, at the time, now it looks, it wasn't that big a deal. At that time, it was a big deal. But I just thought I would enjoy it more. It would be more fun. Whatever you do to be successful is going to be hard work, so you might as well enjoy it while you're doing it. And if you're good at it, you have a better chance of reaching the top. So do what you're good at and do what you enjoy. And don't worry about the money, because guess what? If you're the best at anything, you're going to get paid. If you're the best at anything, and it doesn't matter what it is, you're going to get paid. So don't worry about that. Worry about getting into something you can be passionate about, gets you up every morning. And it turns out that, and I know part of this is leadership. I'm totally into this lead by serving others, because no, that's what gets me going. What gets me going is helping young people become better than what they think is possible. Because I believe that's what happened to me. I had no grandiose plan. My plan, I was going to join the police force like my two brothers. My dad could get me on right out of high school. Now, I will say this, my two brothers who are younger than I am are getting ready to retire with full benefits and pensions and all that kind of stuff, so it wasn't all bad for them either. But I found something that gets the juices flowing, and a lot more than banking did, that's for sure. So do something that you're passionate about, and everything else will fall into place because of that. I had a little list of stuff I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything. I guess the last thing I just want to point out is the key points. Dream big and don't underestimate what you're capable of doing. And the only difference between a dream and a goal is that you put a plan to the dream. So far, you have done all the right things. You're at the right place. You have not eliminated any opportunity because of where you are today and what discipline you have decided to study. You're going to come up to a lot of forks in the road, and that's why being passionate, having a great network, and using your time here to expand that network with really, really quality people that are going to provide incredible opportunities to you in the future that you have no idea. So at the end of it, prepare yourself for those incredible opportunities, and don't worry so much about where they're going to come from, because they will come. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I'm sitting there listening 20-some years ago, I wish I would have heard this, because I was the first kid to go away. I wanted to play basketball, but didn't quite work, right? And when I went through my college experience, I didn't do these things. So I know he's got a list, we'll compare afterwards. But here's what I wish I would have known then. You got to have a vision. You've got to take that step, you've got to give something up. You gave up hockey. You gave up a great job. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you're not clueless. Good example of that. Relationships and network. Have your A game always. Build up trust, because perceptions are going to last a long time. You can't get there by yourself. Don't be afraid. Opportunities are going to present themselves. Have faith, right? And you're doing the right things, and it's going to come back. Have passion, dream big. I missed something? So our team always reflects, we still got to do that. Something else that struck me, you said you believe that leadership is about serving others. I know that's the case with them. There's 24 student athletes in 8 different sports in College of Engineering and Computer Science. Right? And some of those students are going to come back and share their story with you. And I believe that's partly because what he's doing. Right? He's giving back. And they're building this leadership institute. So I know you're living that. And that's way huge.
I'm living the dream.
You're living the dream. And so I thank you for giving us something back.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Awesome.
So what we'll do is we'll do the Q&A session. If you want to just walk up to the mic, and we'll just start interacting, and this way we make sure everyone gets to hear his responses, right?
I was wondering, what were some of the things besides just that it was going to be more fun when you decided to go from banking for 2 years and like a stable job to go to this academic assistant? Like, what were some of the things going through your head when you had to make that decision?
Actually, a couple of the hardest part about making that decision was it was obvious that I was the opportunity to get it back in athletics and actually do that as a career, because as a student athlete, when you think of a career in athletics, you think about being a coach. And that really wasn't something I was interested in. Just the fact that I was being introduced to that you could actually make a career out of athletics, athletic administration. But the toughest thing for me to get over was I was coming from a banking background where it's all about time, and you know, after 3 years you're an officer, and after 5 years you're an AVP, and then you become a VP, and then senior VP, and then divisional president, whatever. And it's very mapped out that if you do this, this is what happens. Where I was going into totally uncharted territory, and I remember asking, well, if I take this job as an academic advisor, where will it lead? And they said, we don't know, that's totally up to you. And so that really was the kind of the leap of faith career-wise, but it was something I was passionate about, and helping student athletes or helping young people and be successful. So that's kind of the toughest part about, actually that was even tougher than giving up the paycheck, was trying to figure out where this was going to lead, because I had no idea. But then as I started to get into it and really get an understanding of that business, I looked at my career as a puzzle, and I needed to pick up all the right pieces. And so when I left Georgia Tech, I had built this academic support program. So the reason I actually took the Houston job and not the Michigan State job, even though Michigan State, bigger program, Big Ten, all that, at Houston there was only 4 associate athletic directors. At Michigan State there was 10, 15, I mean it's a huge program. I knew I would get more responsibility at Houston, and I'd pick up puzzle pieces that I knew I didn't have. So I had the academic thing down, I had the compliance thing down, and I was a banker, so I had the business thing down. But I hadn't done a lot of other things that ultimately, if I wanted to be the athletic director, I was going to have to pick up those pieces. So I guess the other point is sometimes you got to step back to move ahead to get where you want to go. And that's what I did there, and that's kind of what went through my mind doing it.
So Todd, so have you ever taken that leap of faith? You got there, and then you scratched your head and said, oh, geez, what have I gotten myself into? I should have?
Well, I've done it plenty of times when I've got there, and then it's like, oh, no, okay, now what am I going to do?
Right. So then how'd you work yourself out of that, right? So these guys are going to make a choice in a year or two.
Yeah. You basically, you put it into overdrive. I mean, one of the things that you as engineers, the advantage that you're used to working hard. And I know it's almost cliche, but there are people that are always smarter than you,
Yeah.
but nobody can outwork you. That ends up being your deal. So, I mean, when you find yourself behind the 8 ball, it's like study, find your mentors, find colleagues that can help you. And regardless of job, I remember going to work for C&S Bank, and even though I had taken all the finance and accounting and all that kind of stuff, and my degree said that I knew what I was doing, I had no idea what I was doing. And they give you, a balance sheet, whatever, and say, what should we be lending this company money? And I had to go from books, what I'd learned and taken tests, and actually start to apply it, and there's actual real money involved. It's scary. But that's where you find your colleagues, your support, who can you trust, who can you talk to. And I know a lot of people, some people talking about building your own board of directors of friends and colleagues that along the way, mentors, that as you make those moves, you can lean on them and call up a professor and say, hey, They've asked me to build this bridge, now what do I do? Or they've made me team leader, where do I even start? That's where having that network and those very good trusting relationships come in handy, because you make that phone call and said, how do I build my team? And that's the other thing, the higher you go, you have fewer and fewer peers. So that's why it becomes so important to build that network, because when I'm an assistant or an associate athletic director, I got my colleagues right around me. When I'm an athletic director, my peer is at another school somewhere. I have no peers here. And so that's where the other part of it is, as you're building and building your network, you're also building those confidants that as you move up and you do find yourself in a position where you're way over your head or out of your league, who are you going to call that's going to help you get there? Because the thing is, you got the job because you're qualified. In a lot of cases, especially starting out, you're going to get the job. I got the job like you'll get the job. They trust your degree. They trust they know what that means, because they don't really know you. But they're going off the brand. And some brands are better than others, and you're fortunate. So that first job, you are going to feel like you're totally over your head. But you can learn it. You're qualified to be there, and you're just going to have to pull some all-nighters and do what you've been doing.
So in this board of directors, this mentorship, again, in a year, do they just need to sit at the desk and hope a mentor comes up? Who owns that process?
You own it. I mean, obviously, there may be people that, so who are my mentors? They're people that obviously I have developed it's a reciprocal relationship. I mean, it would be great if I had the AD at Michigan was one of my mentors, but I don't know that person. And if I linked them LinkedIn, know what? He may accept my LinkedIn link, but that's not somebody I'm just going to call up and say, hey, what do you think I need to do? Because I don't know that person. And so right now, it's going to be, and you don't know where everybody's going to grow, but who do you connect with, and who are in positions that have knowledge of things that you aspire to be or do? And so you're going to start off with faculty and friends and friends of your parents, people that you have a relationship with, but as you evolve in your career, that will then start to include colleagues that maybe you worked with and then go to another company, or those types of things. So that thing is continually evolving, and you're picking up people along the way. And the great thing about athletics is I can actually find, I would say, every person I've ever worked with within 48 hours. And that would have been even prior to the internet, because it's such a tight community. And so that's the cool thing about what we do. But building that board of directors or that advisory board is something that you need to be doing all along the way. I remember when I got back from my trip and I've got these job offers, and my brother-in-law, who is an entrepreneur, knew nothing about athletics, but was on my board of directors, on my advisory board. I needed him just to walk me through the process, and him just to ask me the questions. I go, I got 2 jobs. You know, when it rains, it pours. You don't got a job, then you got more than you can handle, right? And he walked me through, and all he was doing was having me answer my own questions. Yep. But I trusted him. And so you need those kind of people around you.
So just last 2 weeks, I got a new person on my board of directors. Didn't know me until 2 weeks ago. But it was that sanity check, and just the question, and dig down a little bit deeper. It's a cool thing.
So, some people you just have a connection with right away. Yeah. I mean, it just works.
Is there another question? Hey, you may maybe hop on the mic just so make sure we can.
I have 2 questions. One is, Was there ever a time that you tried to take a step forward or you tried to do something and it didn't work out how you wanted to, and what you do about that? And my second question is, what was your 40 time?
Okay. I'll start with the second question first. 4.35. So that's how a Canadian kid gets a scholarship pretty easily. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you're always pushing the envelope, there's a lot of things that you do that aren't going to work, or that you would like to work faster, and a lot of it is making sure, there's a couple of things, but the first thing is that your plan that you try not to I guess to use football as a metaphor, not to outkick your coverage. And that means not to make it such a leap that it's a total flyer. And really base where you're trying to go on sound principles. Even knowing you could do everything right, and it still may not work. But I think as engineers and entrepreneurs, that just becomes part of it. And I heard Dean Jarley talk this morning at the College of Business thing downtown, and he said that in the College of Business they're actually having a failure competition, because basically to be successful you got to fail first. And I'd say some of the things that it's funny, the thing is we all fail, but one of the great things about being an athlete is you get over it real quick and you just move on to the next play. And I think that's what you also have to do in business. I mean, you learn from it, but I'll give you probably one of those defining, and I don't know if it was a failure, but it was early in my career in academics, which is one of those moments where you want to find a place to hide. And unfortunately in athletics you can't hide. But I was as a new academic advisor, it was August, and the press was hammering us about, was everybody eligible? And we had some kids that weren't yet. But they were doing papers, they were doing some things that were going to change their status, but I could not really say what was going on for privacy reasons, whatever. And I wasn't used to dealing with the press, and I just had never been in a position like that. And what happened was, I said the reason that a certain student athlete wasn't eligible yet was that the grades hadn't been turned in, and I gave up a professor's name. And that professor's name ended up in the paper, and that was not true. Holy smokes. So it wasn't a call, I was on the doorstep of that professor's office at 6 o'clock in the morning, waiting for him to get there. And I had to go see the dean, and then I went and saw everybody else I could see to just say, how sorry I was. But the thing that hit me the most was my athletic director at the time, Homer Rice, which I didn't know until later, actually had to write an apology to the dean, the professor, everybody else associated with, the president of the university, and he never said a word to me. And that, when you talk about what kind of leader you want to be, and manager, and how devoted do you think I was to that guy after that episode? And years later, as an athletic director, I had one of our directors of marketing, actually, you know how you have these free throw contests at halftime, and if you sink it, you get a car or whatever? Well, I had a young guy that was in charge of marketing that didn't buy the insurance policy, and we actually had somebody sink it. So which meant we had to pay for it, and of course I had no money to do that. And he was ready to take a loan out and pay for it himself and the whole bit, but it took me back to when I was in that position. And it's not only a one-on-one situation, everybody else is looking to see what you're going to do. And so in my case, I just, basically told them not to worry about it, we'd figure it out. And, we eventually found a way to deal with it. But I could just have easily blown them up, fired them, done all these different options that I had. But I remembered when I was in that position and the effect it had on me, because the athletic director, he didn't even say don't worry about it. He didn't say anything, yet I knew he was out on a limb out there protecting me. And so that's, I learned a big management leadership lesson by going through that experience.
Hey, real quick, I know some have to go to class, so we'll follow up. We'll continue the dialogue afterwards, but one last time, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
They don't want to go to class. This is even better. This is cool. Hey, so let's still do group, as long as people want to stay. We already got one volunteer. Looks like going to the mic. There we go.
Hi, great talk. I was especially inspired by your success after going out on a limb and following through with your dream to travel. That's impressive. And I'd like to know, which country do you find most enjoyable, or whatever? What did you have the best experience in?
Sure. I would say there's a couple of them, and all for different reasons, but
Sure.
East Africa was just totally amazing.
Yeah?
Just an incredible experience. India was, and that's obviously in the 90s, so the India of today is probably I probably wouldn't recognize a lot of it.
Sure.
And we traveled like locals, so you can imagine the intensity of that experience.
Yeah.
And then Nepal, just because of the Himalayas, there will never be development there, just because there's no roads.
Right.
And
No
so
background.
the opportunity to kind of just be out there, and you've never seen stars like that. I just remember in the camaraderie, because the way that it works in trekking the Himalaya, because it's all about altitude, and you can only go a certain altitude every day to acclimate yourself. So whoever starts the same time you do, even though it's going to be a 4-week to 6-week trek, you're going to be with for 4 to 6 weeks. So you just meet some incredible people that you end up being friends with for, really for the rest of your life.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, this is 2 questions. Number 1, which position did you play when you played football for Georgia Tech? And 2, what was the most important lessons that you learned from playing football that you took over to your professional career?
Sure. I'd say I was an outside linebacker, what we call a will, which is on the weak side away from the tight end. And as far as my football career, unfortunately, the person that was recruited behind me was Pat Swilling, who ended up being an all-pro. So I quickly became a special teams specialist. But I'd say the thing that I've learned the most was just the perseverance, the getting knocked down and having to get back up, part of athletics, and how it's been practical, I guess, in my not only my professional but as well as my personal life as well. I mean, things happen, and you got to be resilient. And I remember distinctly on that trip, we were at about 18,000 feet, and we actually lost somebody up there. And I just remember, we couldn't leave without her because she would die up there. And I just remember dropping our packs and me thinking back to two-a-days in Atlanta, Georgia, when it was 100 degrees, and how painful that was. And I just knew that regardless of what it took, we're going to find this girl. And it all worked out, and we found her, and fortunately there was a full moon so that we could get out, follow the path. But I distinctly remember going back to my athletic days, and that really given me the strength to know we were going to be able to do this.
You have worked in different type of companies. Which would you say in your personal experience was more gratifying, working for a big company with a big team or working for a small company with a smaller program?
You know, for me personally, I've enjoyed working for, well, I guess UCF isn't a small company, but but I think it's really more about the culture than maybe the size, and I really like being at a place where it's more than about the paycheck, where it's everybody's on the same page, moving in the same direction, and creating that family atmosphere. And that's and I think that regardless of whether you're in a big corporation or a small company, you can create that. You can create that culture. But for me personally, I've enjoyed working in higher education more than I enjoyed being at a major bank.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I don't think you spoke to this during your story, but how'd you end up here at UCF with us, and what specific things led you here?
Sure.
Turned you on to it?
Yeah, because I came here from Oregon State, where I've been the deputy AD I'd been there for 9 years. And so the three things I was looking for in another opportunity, because I was in a great situation, which that's the great thing. When you're in a great situation, you can just pick and choose where you want to go and if you want to go. And I wanted three things. One, it had to be a place that I wanted to live. And more importantly, a place where my wife would want to live. So whenever a headhunter calls, I'd have to answer that question first. Can I sell this at home? And so obviously Orlando fit the bill there. And then I wanted to be somewhere where we could win. I wanted to feel like we had a chance to win and have a winning program across the board, and so that we could be successful. I wanted to be successful. And I felt like because of UCF, where it's located, the fact that Florida is producing some incredible athletes. In fact, it's Florida, Texas, and California are the three main states that I felt like this was a place that we could be successful. And then the third thing, which is really a direct, really from my own experience, I wanted to be at an institution where there was a place for everybody, that everybody didn't have to be an engineer to be successful. Because one of the things that was most difficult for me at Georgia Tech was a lot of times we were jamming a square peg in a round hole because of the limited curriculum. And so regardless of whether you were interested in science and technology and engineering or not, that's what you were doing. And I just saw how painful that was on students that wasn't their niche. And coming from a place like Oregon State, where there is a place for everybody, so you can be an engineer if you want to be, but you don't have to be. I wanted to have that similar situation where the student athlete could have a full experience, be successful, and be a leader on campus. The other part about Georgia Tech, on the best day, and I was a good student, but I looked around, I was just one of many, and my influence beyond athletics was pretty limited in what I could do. But at a school like UCF, leaders can rise to the top, and I wanted to have the opportunity for our student athletes to be able to lead on campus and not just in their sports.
One more. When Georgia Tech and UCF play each other, football, basketball, whatever, who do you root for?
They won't play us for some reason. But when they
if they did.
When they do, I'd love to beat them. You know how you always want to beat your brother?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the deal, you know? Probably want to beat them more than anybody else.
Thank you.
Except Georgia.
Hello.
Hey.
I wanted to ask, was there any point in your life that you thought too much power could be overwhelming?
Too much power
Too
could
much
be
power, knowing what you're capable of.
I think, sometimes You do, well, one, I think it's important that you remember who you actually are.
Right.
And that you stay grounded and never lose sight of that. I think I don't worry so much about too much power. I think sometimes you look at the responsibility and it's like, whoa. And that's really where putting a great team together comes into play, because if you worry about all the stuff that you're responsible for, I mean, you would never be able to sleep. And so one of the really important things, I think, is building a great executive team that you trust, that have great judgment, that are really, really good, so that you know that they got it. Because there's no way you can have it all.
Right.
And so I'm not really as concerned about having too much power as how am I going to handle all of this. And of course, we're in under such a microscope that an 18-year-old kid, of which we got 500 18 to 22-year-olds that aren't always going to make all the right decisions, and how something that they do can blow up the whole thing. And so that's where you better have a great team of coaches and just people that are qualified to do what they're doing.
All right, thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us. I have two questions. One's more of a curiosity. You spoke about how you really don't know how much influence that you can have on someone, so I was wondering if you ever told your athletics advisor that he had that influence on you when you were 10 years old.
Yeah, oh yeah, in fact, he was the best man in my wedding.
Oh, wow.
And he's been a lifelong friend. So, and the other part of the story is my brother, who was only 5 at the time, maybe, yeah, 5, ended up becoming a lawyer because of this guy. And my brother graduated in the top 5% of his class and joined the firm of Heenan Blakey, which was, the senior partner was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, which was one of our former prime ministers. And he took that job because at the time Scott was working for Heenan Blakey. So his effect on our family is pretty remarkable when you consider he's just a punk 20-year-old kid.
And my second question is, you just spoke about having a great team and building that together. So what would be the one characteristic that you think a great team needs?
The ability to collaborate, and I'd say lack of ego. Can't be somebody, you can't worry about who gets credit. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thing that I think kind of can screw up teams, is when you've got people that either get siloed, or they want to make sure they get all the credit for whatever it is that they've put into it. And I think selfless would be what I would say is the characteristic you need from your team members.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I have one question. Like, as a college student and kind of just as an American student, what eased your transition from all education to the professional world? Because that's something that really worries me, is going from only knowing education to going to the professional world.
I think the thing is the opportunity to, whether it's through internships or just to have, while you're in school, getting a feel for whether it's shadowing somebody or making a connection with somebody in that field, and really being able to find out what it's like. That's something, unfortunately, that I didn't do, and that's why I was such a fish out of water. But I think that knowing it on the front end, and that's why my Leadership Institute is so important, because I realize now that the smart kids aren't going to have it all figured out. And so what can we do to prepare them so that they know they need a white shirt to work at IBM or wherever? But I would say taking advantage of opportunities to either meet people that are in that field or have the opportunity to go to their offices and just kind of get a feel for what it's like, what the culture's like, and that sort of thing.
Okay, and then on that note, how did you deal with feeling like you may have missed an opportunity, and that, like, knowing that wasn't the end of the world? Because to me, that's something I also worry about a little bit too.
Yeah. No, I think about it a lot because it really has been the fuel to everything I've done student development-wise, because what I found out when I went back as the academic advisor, my file was still there. So I thought, well, this is going to be pretty cool. So I pulled my file, and in that file I saw all the various opportunities and scholarships that discussions had been made about me, but I was never included in. And so I missed a lot of opportunities. I even though everything worked out, I didn't come out on a fast track because I just didn't know. And I didn't know what grad school was, and I didn't know that I could be a grad assistant, somebody else would pay for it and all those types of things. And so I think about it a lot, and that's really what's led me to create the kind of programming for our student athletes, because we just can't assume that people know. But you can't let it eat you up either. You move on, and because there's going to be another opportunity down the road. You know, I think back, would I have loved like one of the things that I didn't get to do that I would have loved to have done is gotten my master's at an elite academic institution and just been a student and kind of felt, you know, what that's like to be in study groups and talk about philosophy or whatever, or really kind of get into it, because as an athlete you're in such a structured environment that unfortunately I missed that opportunity. It would have been really, really cool to do that, and that's something that I think maybe someday when I'm done, as far as working, that I wouldn't mind going back and pursuing a master's or a graduate degree at and kind of being able to focus on being a student. But opportunity, you can't let it eat you up, because you know what? Some doors will open and you won't walk in for whatever reason, but there's another door that will open along the way.
Thank you.
Having so many opportunities available to you and moving around so much, was there ever a point that you felt comfortable somewhere and you decided to take the opportunity anyway because it may seem better, or like what was your driving factor and how did you deal with that?
Sure. Obviously, Georgia Tech, I was pretty comfortable, but I had this goal of traveling around the world. If I hadn't had that goal, I don't know that if I would have ever moved. So that was one that I had this burning desire to travel around the world, and I was willing to give up what was a great place and that I had called home. And then when I got to Oregon, well, I went out there for what I told my wife at the time would be 3 or 4 years and turned into 9. We could have stayed there forever. It was a great situation, great league. One of the, in athletics, if you're winning and you love your coaches and you love your student athletes, that it doesn't get any better than that. And that's what we had out there, because there's a lot of places that you may be winning, but not like your coaches and not like your student athletes. And so it was a perfect situation, but and that's why we stayed for 9 years and not 3. I mean, it was I won't say it was a perfect situation, but it was a great situation. So it's, I think one of the things that's important, and this is what I tell students, is as you're moving up your career, when I say don't worry about the money, you don't worry about the money as long as you're growing and learning and developing skills, because in a way that is the money. And once you get to a point where been there, done that, and you feel like I'm not learning, I'm not growing, then it better be about the money. And at a point where it's, the money is where it's at and you're not growing, then in my opinion, it's time to move on. And that's not to say anything bad about anything. It's just a matter of you as a person. You either need to be getting paid or you need to be growing. And some type of, and the combination of those two is what determines how long you're willing to stay there.
Hi, I would like to know, it looks like you had a very supportive family and a very supportive wife, but if you encountered any resistance during your planning, because you said the difference between a goal and a dream is to plan, but you are 10 years old, so when you told your parents about your plans, did you encounter any resistance?
Yeah, a lot of resistance, especially because people thought this was a crazy idea. And in fact, my father was totally against it because in his mind, a good job with a pension, what are you going to do with a college degree? Why would you go to college? I got you a job right here with the force with a great pension and benefits. And and in fact, my brother, one of my brothers who is a police officer, is a certifiable genius. And I mean, when I got to be an assistant AD at Georgia Tech, I tried to get him to come there, and I was going to pay for it. My dad talked him out of it because he could get him a job right away, and why would he do that? And this is a guy that, he called me, he said, Todd, I don't think I'm going to get into Georgia Tech. I go, why? He goes, well, I only got 1450 on the SAT, and it's out of 1600. I mean, he is a total Goodwill Hunting guy, but anyways.
So would you say that you had to make your own decisions and resist that?
Yeah,
move on?
I mean, that's it. You got to believe, and you've got to, if you're so passionate about something, you just can't let people get in your way, even if, you know, in my case, it was my own father. And that's, you know, I think that ultimately they end up coming around once you're doing your thing and it's working out and all of that, but not everybody's going to think that your harebrained scheme is a good idea when you lay it out there. And that's why I think being passionate about what you're doing and knowing where you want to go is so important, because in anything you do, there are going to be people out there that say you can't do it. And in the case of me, when I had come up with this dream of going to the U.S. on a football scholarship, a lot of my parents' friends basically told my parents that you shouldn't let him think like that because he'll just be disappointed. And so you got to have, I guess, strong conviction and not be afraid.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.